Red Bull walked into Bahrain confident. By the end of the morning session, they were in the FIA office. Because Lewis Hamilton just tested a rear wing that can gain over 12 km per hour on the straight, without using extra battery. And if it's legal, it could be worth up to half a second per lap. Half a second. In modern Formula 1, that is domination. This isn't a small upgrade. It's not a new floor. It's not a minor tweak. It's a regulation loophole that could flip the entire championship before the first race even begins. And here's the part nobody is saying out loud. If this stays on the car, Red Bull may have already lost their biggest advantage. Because Ferrari did not just build a faster car. They built a smarter one. And by the end of this video, you'll understand why this rear wing could force every team on the grid to redesign their entire concept, or fall behind before lights out in Bahrain. Subscribe now, because what happens next could define the season. Red Bull did not react because of a rumor. They reacted because of what the data showed on the speed trap. Lewis Hamilton crossed the main straight in Bahrain carrying a top speed advantage that should not exist during testing. Not with standard deployment. Not with conservative engine modes. And not without sacrificing something in the corners. But that sacrifice never appeared. That is what triggered the alarm. Because normally, when you trim rear wing for straight line speed, you pay the price in stability. You lose rear grip. You slide more. You overheat the tires. Ferrari did not. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable for their rivals. The SF-26 is not just running low drag. It is dynamically eliminating drag. When the system activates, the upper rear wing element rotates dramatically, almost flipping its aerodynamic profile. Which means the airflow detaches differently. The induced drag nearly disappears. And suddenly the car is cutting through the air like it is running a Monza configuration. But we are in Bahrain. A track that punishes instability. Heavy braking zones. Traction-sensitive exits. Long acceleration phases. You cannot afford a nervous rear end here. Yet Charles Leclerc reported something very specific. He said the car felt planted. Stable. Predictable. And that contradiction is what has Red Bull worried. Because if you gain straight-line speed without paying the traditional aerodynamic cost, you are operating in a different performance window. And here's the detail that changes the entire picture. Ferrari did not stumble into this. This was intentional. Engineers in Maranello identified a regulatory gap. The rules define how quickly a movable aerodynamic surface can transition. They define activation parameters. But they do not clearly define the final resting angle in low drag mode. So Ferrari pushed the interpretation to the edge. Not beyond the rulebook, but right against it. And in Formula 1, living on the edge of legality is often where championships are built. Now imagine you are sitting in the Red Bull garage. You see the telemetry. You compare sector times. You notice Ferrari gaining consistently at the end of the straight. Not randomly. Not because of a toe. But systematically. And you realize this is not a one-lap trick. This is repeatable. That is when panic starts quietly. Because copying this is not simple. This is not just a flap adjustment. It requires structural packaging, hydraulic integration, software calibration. And that software element might be the most dangerous part of all. But we will come back to that. Because what Ferrari has done here is bigger than one rear wing. They have shifted the balance of power before the first race weekend has even begun. And the paddock knows it. Now let's go deeper. Because the rear wing alone is dramatic. But it is not the full weapon. The real disruption is happening in the milliseconds you cannot see. Ferrari is not synchronizing the front and rear wings. They are deliberately offsetting them. And that changes how the car behaves in ways that traditional setups simply cannot replicate. Here is what that means in simple terms. When Hamilton approaches a corner, the front wing closes first. Not at the same time as the rear. First. That instantly shifts the aerodynamic center of pressure forward. The nose bites harder. Turn-in becomes sharper. The car rotates more aggressively on entry. That is why Leclerc described it as artificial rotation. It feels almost assisted. Almost unnatural. But then comes the second phase. As soon as the driver touches the throttle, the front wing opens before the rear adjusts. That moves the balance backward. Rear traction improves. Wheel spin reduces. Stability increases on exit. So within one single corner, the SF-26 behaves like two different cars. Responsive on entry. Stable on exit. Most teams spend years trying to find a compromise between those two traits. Ferrari is dynamically switching between them. Corner by corner. And here is why this is terrifying for the competition. Because this is not visible in a single lap time. You do not see it clearly on the stopwatch. You feel it in consistency. In tire degradation. In confidence. A driver who trusts the car pushes later on the brakes. carries more minimum speed, applies throttle earlier. That compounds over a race distance. And that is where championships are decided. But there is a hidden layer most fans are not considering. Software. This system depends entirely on timing precision. Milliseconds matter. If the front closes too early, the rear becomes unstable. If it opens too late, the balance snaps unpredictably. Which means Ferrari is relying on extremely advanced control algorithms. This is not just aerodynamics. It is computational strategy. And this is where Lewis Hamilton becomes central. Because adapting to a car that changes balance mid-corner is not instinctive. It requires trust. It requires repetition. And it requires feedback. Hamilton's comments were measured. He said he feels more connected, more stable in high-speed sections. But he also hinted that adaptation is ongoing. That tells us something important. Ferrari is still unlocking the system. Which means what we are seeing in testing might not even be its final form. And here is the uncomfortable question for Red Bull. If Ferrari is already this competitive while still learning the system, what happens when they fully understand it? What happens when the mapping is perfected? When the transitions become seamless? When the drivers stop thinking about it? Because at that point, this is no longer a clever interpretation. It becomes a performance platform. And in preseason testing, building a platform is far more dangerous than posting a headline lap time. Red Bull knows this. They dominated through stability, through predictable behavior, through aerodynamic efficiency. Now Ferrari is introducing controlled unpredictability, engineered chaos. And if that chaos is mastered, it could redefine how modern Formula One cars are balanced entirely. But there is still one factor holding everything in suspense: legality. Because innovation means nothing if it never reaches the starting grid. And what happens in the coming days could decide whether this is remembered as a genius breakthrough, or a brilliant idea that never raced. Now the tension moves away from the garage, and into the politics. Because whenever a team finds a gray area, the real battle begins behind closed doors. Red Bull did not waste time. Engineers gathered images, slow motion footage, data comparisons. And they walked straight to the governing body. Not publicly, not dramatically, quietly, but urgently. The first line of attack is the exhaust wing. There is a long-standing regulation that limits the use of exhaust gases for aerodynamic gain. It exists for a reason. Years ago, teams exploited blown diffusers to extreme levels. The sport shut that door firmly. So now the question becomes simple. Is Ferrari energizing airflow in a way that violates that principle? Or are they simply using natural exhaust flow within the current framework? It is a subtle difference. But in Formula One, subtle differences decide everything. Then comes the safety argument. And this is powerful. Because if Red Bull cannot prove illegality, they can argue risk. Imagine the hydraulic system fails at high speed. The rear wing remains in its low drag, near inverted position. Rear downforce collapses instantly. At over 300 kilometers per hour. That scenario alone is enough to raise concern. Even if the probability is low. And the governing body has authority to intervene on safety grounds alone. They can issue a technical directive before the first race. They can redefine acceptable movement angles. They can force redesigns. All within days. Which means Ferrari is racing against the clock. Not on track, but in interpretation. And here is the psychological twist. If the system survives approval, Ferrari wins twice. First, they keep the performance. Second, they demonstrate engineering superiority. That changes paddock perception. Sponsors notice. Drivers notice. Confidence grows internally. Pressure grows externally. But if it is restricted before lights out, the narrative flips. Suddenly Ferrari looks aggressive, risk-heavy, perhaps even desperate, and rivals regain composure. This is why preseason testing feels different this year. Because it is not about who tops the timing sheets. It is about who defines the regulatory direction of the season. And here is the part most people overlook. Even if the rear wing is limited, the software philosophy cannot be unseen. The desynchronized aero concept has already been revealed. Teams are studying it, reverse engineering it, asking their own aerodynamic departments uncomfortable questions. Why did we not think of this? Can we replicate it? How long would it take? Weeks? Months? A full redesign cycle? Time is the most expensive resource in this sport, and Ferrari may have forced everyone to spend it. Now imagine the opening race weekend. Scrutineering complete. Cars lined up. Rear wing either approved or quietly modified. The entire paddock watching the first activation on the main straight. That moment will tell us everything. If the Ferrari pulls away visibly, if the speed delta is undeniable, then Bahrain preseason testing will be remembered as the turning point. If it does not, if the advantage shrinks, then we will know the intervention happened behind the scenes. But either way, something has shifted. Red Bull is no longer reacting to incremental upgrades. They are reacting to conceptual disruption. And disruption creates instability. Not just in lap times, but in confidence. And in Formula One, confidence is performance. Which brings us to the final and most uncomfortable thought. What if Ferrari has more? What if this rear wing is only the visible layer? What if the true advantage lies deeper in integration? In how the power unit, energy deployment, and active aero communicate seamlessly? Because preseason testing rarely shows the full picture. Teams hide maps. They mask fuel loads. They sandbag strategically. So if this is what Ferrari is willing to show publicly, what are they keeping private? And that is the question Red Bull must be asking tonight in Bahrain. Not whether Ferrari is fast, but whether they are ahead in a way that cannot be easily copied. Because if the answer is yes, then the shock we are seeing now is only the beginning. Now let's talk about the driver. Because innovation means nothing if the person behind the wheel cannot extract it. And this is where the Hamilton factor becomes critical. Lewis Hamilton did not join Ferrari to participate. He joined to compete for another world title. And what he is feeling in Bahrain right now may define his entire chapter in red. He described the car as stable in high-speed sections. Planted. Predictable. That alone is significant. For years, he struggled with inconsistent front-end grip, with a car that would not rotate when he needed it. Now he is sitting in a machine that actively shifts balance mid-corner. That is not a small adjustment. That is a philosophical shift in driving style. Because with this system, commitment becomes everything. You have to trust that when you turn in aggressively, the front will respond. You have to trust that when you apply throttle early, the rear will support you. There is no room for hesitation. And here is where things get even more interesting. Hamilton is known for precision, for feeling subtle balance changes, for managing tires over long stints better than almost anyone. If this dynamic aero system reduces lateral sliding, tire degradation drops. If tire degradation drops, race pace improves. And if race pace improves consistently, strategy opens up. Suddenly you are not defending. You are dictating. But here is the hidden pressure. If this system has even the slightest delay, if the aerodynamic shift is not perfectly timed, Hamilton will feel it instantly. A snap-on entry. A rear that steps out unexpectedly. At these speeds, correction margins are minimal. And preseason testing is the only safe environment to explore that limit. That is why these days in Bahrain matter more than headlines. They are building muscle memory. Corner by corner. Session by session. And while Red Bull studies legality, Ferrari is refining execution. That dual timeline is crucial. Because if the system survives and Hamilton masters it before the first race, the competitive landscape shifts immediately. Max Verstappen thrives on stability, on confidence in rear grip, on a car that behaves exactly as expected. Now imagine facing a Ferrari that not only matches straight-line speed, but rotates sharper and exits cleaner. That psychological battle begins before lights out. And confidence, once shaken, is difficult to restore. But we are still in testing. Fuel loads are unknown. Engine modes are hidden. Lap times are misleading. Which brings us to the final layer of uncertainty. What if Ferrari has not shown full power yet? What if the 12 km/h gain we observed is conservative? What if deployment mapping has another step? Because teams rarely reveal maximum capability before the first qualifying session. They protect it. They disguise it.